Welcome to this special Michigan Avenue Forum being broadcast from Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago. I am Lucy Forster-Smith, Senior Associate Pastor for Leadership Development and Adult Education, and I am delighted to be the staff to the Michigan Avenue Forum Committee. The Michigan Avenue Forum is an educational forum that promotes civic formation within the Chicagoland community. It features important thinkers and public leaders on timely topics, advancing the notion that religion in the public square and public theology promotes civil discourse needed in our 21st century world. Today's topic brings us face to face with issues of safety, care for our community, and scientific advances. It addresses one of the most challenging public health crises of our time. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Kevin Ban, Chief Medical Officer for Walgreens Corporation and former faculty at Harvard Medical School, and the Reverend Shannon Kirshner, Senior Pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church. They will engage in a dialogue about the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and implications. For those of you who are viewing this special Michigan Avenue Forum, we're delighted to welcome you, and we encourage you to let family and friends know about this special presentation. It will be available for viewing for the foreseeable future. And now I turn this over to the Senior Pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church, Reverend Shannon Kirshner, who will guide the interview with Dr. Ban.
Thank you, Lucy. I want to extend my gratitude to you, Dr. Ban, for being willing to do this. I know your schedule is in high demand these days. You are everywhere. There are a few questions, though, that we have that we'd like to pose to you on this day. One is about some of the questions that have been raised due to the speed of how these vaccines have been developed. And so would you mind speaking to that process of development in terms of standards of safety and all of that?
Right. Before I get going, Shannon, thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to this sort of back and forth, and hopefully we can unpack a little bit about what's happening with the pandemic in general, and then now specifically, let's get into these vaccines. So, I think a better way to think about the vaccine development than Operation Warp Speed is really Operation Warp Efficiency. And I think that what people ought to keep in mind is that never before have we come together as a community, whether it be the scientific community, the regulatory community, or even the public, to focus on getting a vaccine manufactured and now distributed. So let me go a little bit deeper into that and what I specifically mean by that. And the context of this, Shannon, is that none, or I should say, I'll say it in the positive, all of the touch points as they pertain to effectiveness and safety were met. So there was no cutting of corners as it came or as it pertained to the science. So what did happen? What made this very efficient? Well, the first thing is that there was collective cooperation among scientists across the world in sequencing the virus itself, and then sharing everything that people were learning. In fact, it's interesting, Shannon, to realize that within 5 days of sequencing the coronavirus, which is an RNA virus, within 5 days, we had a vaccine that was a sequence of a vaccine that was available. So that had never happened before, right? So I feel like I'm getting into a monologue, but I'll go a little bit deeper here.
Fine. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Because I really want it to be a dialogue, but let's keep going with this. So a lot of cooperation among scientists, and then next step, a lot of cooperation with regulatory bodies. Never before have you had the regulatory bodies, in this case, the FDA, who's actually waiting for the data to come out and is ready to review it and quickly make a decision around it. That is not how this usually works. It can take months, even years for something like that to happen. Here, everyone was in line to make it happen. Now, lastly, what about recruiting tens of thousands, even 70 or 80,000 patients? Well, back in the 50s, if you were going to try to recruit that many people, it was going to take a lot of time. Nowadays, with technology the internet, with the willingness of people to participate, that happened really quickly. And I know I said that was the last point, but I thought of another one. And that is that these platforms already existed. I think there is some confusion around that.
There is, yeah.
So a lot of people will say, wow, but we have never used messenger RNA before. And that's simply not true. We certainly have been using messenger RNA. There was a messenger RNA platform that was built out already in advance of the pandemic. The same is true of the platform that was used by J&J to develop the vaccine that we expect might get by the end of the month. So I said a lot there, but important to remember, a lot of efficiency and absolutely all of the touch points as it pertains to science were met.
How do you expect this to come and play now with all the variants that are being discovered? For example, we just had news here in Chicagoland that the variant from South Africa has been detected here in our greater metro area. How does all of that work into this continued refinement of vaccines?
Of course. Well, again, I think context is always very helpful. And the context of viruses wanting to evolve and mutate is that is kind of their natural history. Over the course of the last year now, I've had multiple conversations about this virus and the fact that it is likely to mutate. So the first piece is, this is normal. This is not anything that should cause people.
Because that causes everyone to panic, or.
Exactly. Like, oh my God, it's mutating. That's
right.
No. Important context. That's normal. What I will say specifically about these virus variants, and I'll stop and I'll kind of pump the brakes for a second and say that I'm going to use terms like the UK variant or you already mentioned South Africa. Of course, there's also the Brazilian strain. And I'm reluctant to almost do that because I feel like it creates some type of stigma around those countries, and it should not. Mm-hmm. But it's easier, quite honestly, than calling it B117, which is the UK variant. So what I would say is that, actually, I'll show you this because this might be easier to understand. There's a lot of conversation about the spike protein. Are you familiar with that, Shannon? And what I like to do is sort of say, here, let's think of this as being the virus, and here is the spike protein. Can you see that? I don't know if you're.
Yes, yeah.
This is the spike protein. And this is a human cell. Now, what happens is the spike protein is almost like a pick lock. It's what allows the cell to open up, and it allows the coronavirus to enter into the human cell and then replicate. Now, one thing is that the vaccines are targeting this spike protein and almost like getting rid of it. So now the coronavirus can't enter into the human cell. That's why they're so effective, is because it's really getting rid of the mechanism by which the coronavirus can enter into cells. Now, these virus variants, this spike protein is becoming more crafty. It's getting better at its job. The UK variant does not seem to escape the vaccine, but some of the other ones you mentioned, South African and the Brazilian, do to a certain extent. And so we have seen that the virus is more contagious, and that the vaccine, and it's really J&J that we've talked about, and I can explain why that is less effective. But that's not the whole story, and I think we should go deeper into that so people have a better understanding of that.
Okay, thank you very much. So do you want to go deeper into that or no?
Yeah, I think actually, why don't we? Just right now to explain that. So with
because
that,
I know this is on everyone's mind. These are some of the questions that I hear again and again.
Right. So when J&J was the vaccine was first read out, that's when they make their data available. That was about 2 weeks ago.
Right.
There was a pickup by the media saying, wow, it's a lot less effective. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to clean that up for everyone a little bit. Number one, the messenger RNA vaccines, and that's Moderna and Pfizer, were both tested in the United States before the holidays, and therefore were not exposed to any virus variants, okay? The J&J vaccine was tested in the United States, South Africa, and in Latin America, including Brazil. Okay, so that vaccine actually was exposed to these virus variants. So to say that, to make a comparison between the Pfizer product and the Moderna product and the J&J product is not really an apples to apples comparison because they weren't tested. J&J was. What really matters here is, severe outcomes. And what's very encouraging about the J&J vaccine is, despite the fact that it was in communities that had these variants, severe disease was limited 85% of the time. There were no hospitalizations and no death among 45,000 people in this study. So what we're seeing here is that while it's not as effective, people might still get sick. They don't get severely ill. They don't get hospitalized, and they lose their lives. And I would make the point that that matters a great deal. And therefore, even in the context of these virus variants, the vaccines are still able to make the disease less severe, and that's important.
I appreciate you spelling it out like that. It's because it's so difficult for someone like me who doesn't have a medical background to try and keep up with everything. As a matter of fact, it's very difficult just to figure out how and when and where I'll be eligible to get a vaccine. And would you please talk a little bit about the complexity of that endeavor?
Yes, sure.
Distribution.
Yeah, let's get out of my little rabbit hole here of science where I feel it's like a warm blanket and I can go deeper into some of the more practical issues. And I think people are wondering around about like, hey, who's getting the vaccine? How is that determined? And when will I be eligible? Is that fair? That
is very fair. Yeah, because it totally depends on where you live, is from what I can tell.
That's right. So let me explain that. And I'll even put it in the context of Walgreens and the role that it's playing. In the very first phase of the distribution and administration of vaccine, everyone will remember this was at the end of December, there was guidance that came from the CDC. This is guidance. And it said, hey, look, our recommendation is that you ought to vaccinate the folks on the front line of care, healthcare providers, and you ought to vaccinate people living in long-term care facilities. And the reason was because, of all of the COVID deaths across our country, just around 40% of them, of those deaths occurred in long-term care facilities. So that it was a big number, and they wanted to go in and protect that very vulnerable community. And in fact, the role that we played then was to go into those long-term care facilities, but I'll get there. Now, those were guidelines that were made, and a lot of people don't realize that. The autonomy or the decision power was pushed to the states and to the jurisdictions, okay? So, of course, we know there are 50 states, and there are 16 jurisdictions, okay? That's like Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Confusingly, Shannon, it is also Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York City. So said a different way, Chicago and Illinois are two jurisdictions. Yep. Chicago is in Illinois. They can have completely different eligibility.
And they do.
Well, you pointed that out. So that's right. And this is confusing to people. Yes. Okay. So again, CDC makes guidelines. It's then up to the states, the jurisdictions, to decide how they actually want to allocate the vaccine and how to determine eligibility. Now, what I would say from our point of view is that doesn't make it 66 times more difficult than it would be just to work with one stakeholder. That makes it some power of 66, but that's what we are doing. We are working with all of the states and all of the jurisdictions to follow their guidelines, because Walgreens does not decide who gets vaccine. Once it's determined, then what we do is help distribute and administer the vaccines. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. Well, let's stick with distribution just a little bit. Part of our call as a church is to help be on the forefront for issues of justice and equity. So one of the questions I would have is, what is Walgreens doing to assure that disinvested neighborhoods and communities are being given the same opportunity to receive the vaccine as more well-resourced neighborhoods and communities?
Right. So along the same guidelines of, hey, let's go out and vaccinate these vulnerable communities, we know that underserved, vulnerable minority communities have been the hardest hit. Right. So in now what is phase 2, and actually you and I happen to be talking on really the first day of phase 2 of the federal retail pharmacy collaboration, then this now second phase, first phase was the long-term care facilities. Second phase now is we're receiving directly vaccine from the federal government. And what we did is we're choosing stores located in communities that have a high social vulnerability index. That is a metric that is created by the CDC to say, hey, these are the folks who generally are medically underserved and vulnerable and therefore need more attention. I'll tell you, it's not enough, but we're starting by putting vaccine into those stores. And then the next thing we're doing is we're really trying to do everything that we can to remove the barriers to getting this vaccine. For example, not everyone is comfortable going online and scheduling an appointment. We know that. So as soon as next week, we will have the possibility that people can call and they'll go through an automated system to schedule their appointment as long as they're eligible. Okay. If that doesn't work for you, you can go into our stores and our team members will help you, as long as you're eligible, schedule an appointment. And then lastly, we know transportation can be a problem. And we just announced earlier this week that Walgreens and Uber are going to be working together to provide transportation so that people who don't have the means to get to a place where they can be vaccinated can. Now, that's just the beginning. There's more work, Shannon, that we need to do here, but that's the type of work that we're committed to doing.
Yeah, and it is a good start, I would say. And then communities like mine and other faith communities, I think, have a role in trying to advocate for people to trust the science and to be willing to go and get vaccinated. So let's say that I show up, I'm eligible finally, and I receive the vaccine. What are some of the side effects I need to be looking out for? What should I expect regarding the process and all of that?
Right. So that was something that received a lot of attention up front, right? This whole concept of side effects and then severe allergic reactions. So I feel again like I need to break that down and really explain that better. First of all, side effects, and this would include fever, headache, muscle ache, pain at the site of the injection. These are all normal, good signs. This is proof that your immune system is actually working. A vaccine works to trick your body into thinking it's infected, and so that it starts to mount an immune response. Okay, and then your body says, "Wait, I'm not infected. I'm okay," and you can tell that that's happening because of these side effects. They are treatable with over-the-counter medications. They last a day or two, and then they get better. And most importantly, it's a good sign that your immune system is doing what it ought to do. That's very different than a severe allergic reaction. And what we do know about the two messenger RNA vaccines, again, Moderna and Pfizer, is that they tend to have a higher allergic reaction profile than other vaccines that we know. And still it's rare. I'll be more specific by way of benchmarking. The flu shot that we all get every year. In 1 million doses of vaccine administered, it will have an allergic reaction, severe allergic reaction, about 1.4 times, I think it is, okay? For these messenger RNA, it's like 12 times in 1 million. But still, I want to remind everyone, 12 allergic reactions in 1 million doses is still rare. Now, you might say, okay, well then should I have my shot in a hospital, in my doctor's office? It's not necessary. Our pharmacists are trained to manage allergic reactions. So we have processes to do that. Now, if it's more convenient for you, if you're able to get a vaccine through your doctor or some other place, by all means do that. But feel comfortable that if you get an appointment with Walgreens, that we can handle that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, Dr. Ban, thank you for your time. I am very grateful for you helping us to understand this whole process a little bit more fully. And thank you for answering my questions as in depth as you did and as kindly as you did. And we really are deeply grateful for your willingness to spend this time with us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.